The scorching sun beat down mercilessly on the parched earth of Placitas, New Mexico, as Zachariah Sullivan rode his chestnut stallion along the dusty trail, unaware that the summer of 1879 would forever change his life. The tall cowboy with sun-weathered skin and piercing blue eyes had spent the last 5 years drifting from town to town, working cattle drives and taking odd jobs, trying to outrun the ghosts of his past. A former Texas Ranger, Zachariah had left that life behind after a bloody shootout left his partner dead and his faith in justice shattered. Placitas was supposed to be just another stop on his endless journey. The small mining town nestled in the foothills of the Sandia Mountains had recently struck silver, bringing with it the usual assortment of hopeful miners, desperate gamblers, and predatory businessmen. Zachariah had taken a job with the Silver Creek Mining Company, providing security for their shipments and keeping an eye on the growing tension between the miners and the company's heavy-handed management. As he approached the outskirts of town, he noticed a plume of black smoke rising in the distance. Zachariah frowned, squinting against the harsh sunlight. The smoke came from the direction of the Silverwood estate, owned by Thaddeus Silverwood, the wealthiest man in the territory and principal owner of the Silver Creek Mining Company. "Come on, Thunder," Zachariah urged his horse forward, an inexplicable sense of dread pooling in his gut. He'd had little interaction with Silverwood himself, a stern-faced man with cold eyes who ruled his business and family with an iron fist. Rumors about the man circulated throughout town, whispers of cruelty, of a wife who had mysteriously passed years ago, and of 3 beautiful daughters who were rarely seen in public. As Zachariah crested the hill, the Silverwood mansion came into view. Smoke billowed from the east wing of the sprawling adobe and timber structure. Several workers were frantically forming a bucket line from the well to the house, but the flames were spreading quickly in the dry summer heat. Zachariah dismounted and tied Thunder to a nearby post before rushing to join the firefighting efforts. The foreman, a burly man named Jenkins, spotted him immediately. "Sullivan, thank God you're here. The fire started in the kitchen and it's spreading fast." "Mr. Silverwood is away on business in Santa Fe." "Where's everyone else?" Zachariah asked, accepting a bucket of water and passing it down the line. "Cook and most of the staff got out," Jenkins replied, wiping sweat from his brow. "But no one's seen the Silverwood girls." Zachariah's blood ran cold. "They're still inside," Jenkins nodded grimly. "Probably. They're usually kept to themselves in their rooms or the cellar. Silverwood's mighty protective of those daughters." Without hesitation, Zachariah handed his bucket to another worker and strode toward the house. "I'm going in to find them." "Sullivan, wait. The east wing is already lost. If they're there, then I'll check the cellar first," Zachariah called over his shoulder, pulling his bandana up over his nose and mouth as he approached the mansion. The front entrance was still untouched by flames, but thick smoke hung in the air. Zachariah entered cautiously, crouching low where the air was clearer. The opulent interior of the Silverwood mansion stood in stark contrast to the modest homes in town. Crystal chandeliers, imported furniture, and ornate paintings lined the walls, evidence of Thaddeus Silverwood's immense wealth and expensive taste. "Hello," Zachariah called out, his voice echoing through the grand entryway. "Miss Silverwood, anyone here?" Only the distant crackle of flames answered him. Remembering what Jenkins had said about the cellar, Zachariah moved quickly through the house, searching for the entrance. He found it at the back of the kitchen, a heavy wooden door with an iron latch, mercifully still untouched by the fire that was consuming the adjacent dining room. To his shock, The door was secured with a large padlock. "Hello, is anyone down there?" he shouted, pressing his ear to the wood. After a moment of silence, he heard a faint female voice calling for help. "Stand back from the door," Zachariah shouted, drawing his revolver. He fired 2 shots at the padlock, shattering it, then wrenched the door open. A narrow staircase descended into darkness. Smoke was already beginning to drift down the stairs, and Zechariah knew they didn't have much time. He hurried down the steps, using a match to light an oil lamp hanging on the wall at the bottom. The cellar was larger than he expected, filled with wine racks, storage crates, and preserved foods. At the far end, he spotted another door, this one also locked from the outside. "Help, please, we're in here," a woman's voice called out, stronger now. "I'm coming." Zachariah strode to the door, examining the lock. This one was simpler, and he managed to break it open with the butt of his revolver. The door swung open to reveal 3 young women huddled together on a small cot. Their fine dresses were wrinkled and dirty, their faces pale from lack of sunlight. Despite their disheveled appearance, Zachariah was struck by their beauty. 3 sisters with varying shades of auburn hair and striking features that marked them unmistakably as sisters. The eldest stood protectively in front of the others. She was tall and slender, with intelligent green eyes that assessed Zachariah warily despite the desperation of their situation. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice surprisingly steady. "Zachariah Sullivan, madam. I work security for your father's mining company. The house is on fire, and we need to leave immediately." The middle sister stepped forward. "Father locked us down here 3 days ago. He said we were being punished for disobedience." Zachariah's jaw tightened at this confirmation of the town's darkest rumors about Thaddeus Silverwood, but he kept his expression neutral. "We can discuss that later. Right now, we need to get you out of here before the whole place goes up in flames." The youngest sister let out a small whimper, clinging to her middle sister's arm. She couldn't have been more than 18, with wide, frightened eyes. "Marguerite," the eldest said to the middle sister, "help Charlotte, sir, lead the way, we'll follow." Zachariah nodded, impressed by her composure. "And you are Madeline," she replied. "Madeline Silverwood, Miss Madeline, stay close. The smoke's getting thicker upstairs." They climbed the cellar stairs quickly, Zachariah leading the way with Madeline right behind him, followed by Marguerite supporting Charlotte. When they reached the kitchen, flames had engulfed half the room, and the smoke was so thick it was difficult to see more than a few feet ahead. "Cover your mouths and noses with your sleeves," Zachariah instructed, coughing as he inhaled a lungful of smoke. "Stay low and follow me." He led them through the kitchen and into the main hallway, navigating around falling debris as the fire ate through the wooden beams above. Charlotte stumbled once, and Zechariah quickly caught her arm, steadying her before continuing toward the front entrance. When they finally burst through the front doors into the sunlight, a cheer went up from the workers still fighting the fire. Jenkins rushed over, his face blackened with soot. "Thank God," he exclaimed. "We thought you were a goner, Sullivan." Zachariah guided the sisters to a safe distance from the burning mansion, finding them a spot in the shade of a large cottonwood tree. "Are you ladies hurt?" he asked, scanning each of them for injuries. "We're unharmed," Madeline answered, though her voice now shook slightly as the reality of their narrow escape sank in. "Just thirsty." Jenkins hurried to fetch water while Zachariah removed his jacket and spread it on the ground for the youngest sister, Charlotte, who had begun to tremble violently. Shock, he suspected, rather than cold in the summer heat. "Your father is in Santa Fe," he told them gently. "Do you have somewhere to stay in town? Other family, perhaps?" The 3 sisters exchanged glances before Madeline spoke again. "No, Father has kept us isolated. We have no friends in
This
town, no
story
other
was posted
family
on the
nearby.
channel The Rusty Saddle.
Marguerite, the
Please do
middle
not
sister,
repost it
spoke
in
up,
any
her voice
form.
bitter. Father ensures we remain dependent on him. We've barely left the estate in years. Zachariah's expression darkened. What kind of man imprisoned his own daughters? And for what crime? Disobedience could mean anything from speaking out of turn to attempting to live their own lives. I have a friend who owns the boarding house in town, he said finally. Mrs. Carson is a good woman. She'll give you rooms until we can sort things out. Charlotte looked up at him, her blue eyes wide with fear. What will Father do when he returns, if he finds out we've left? Zachariah's jaw set in a hard line. Your father locked you in a cellar and left town. If not for the fire and someone checking on you, you might have. He couldn't finish the sentence, the thought too disturbing. You're all grown women. He has no right to treat you that way. Madeline studied him intently, as if trying to determine whether he could be trusted. Finally, she nodded. Thank you, Mr. Sullivan. We accept your offer of help. Jenkins returned with canteens of water, which the sisters accepted gratefully. As they drank, Zachariah stepped aside with the foreman. The fire, he asked quietly. Jenkins shook his head. No stopping it now. The whole place will be gone by nightfall. We're just making sure it doesn't spread to the stables or worker housing. Any idea what started it? Cook says it was a grease fire that got out of hand, but who knows? Jenkins lowered his voice further. Sullivan, those girls. There've been rumors for years. Silverwood keeping them locked away like that. It ain't right. No, Zachariah agreed, glancing back at the three sisters huddled together beneath the tree. It isn't. Silverwood won't take kindly to someone interfering with his daughters. Man's got a temper like a rattlesnake. Zachariah's hand instinctively moved to rest on the grip of his revolver. I'll keep that in mind. After ensuring the sisters had recovered enough to travel, Zachariah arranged for a wagon to take them into town. The ride was mostly silent, the three women clearly overwhelmed by the day's events and the sudden freedom thrust upon them. Occasionally, Charlotte would let out a small sob, quickly stifled by Marguerite's comforting embrace. Madeline sat straight-backed and alert, her eyes constantly scanning their surroundings as if seeing the world anew. Several times, Zachariah caught her watching him with a mixture of gratitude and suspicion. Mrs. Carson, a plump, kind-faced widow who had run the Placidas boarding house since her husband's death in '75, welcomed them with open arms despite the lateness of the hour and their disheveled appearance. You poor dears, she clucked, ushering them inside the tidy two-story building. I've heard such stories, she caught herself, glancing apologetically at Zachariah. Well, never mind that now. Let's get you settled with rooms and some hot food. Thank you, Mrs. Carson, Zachariah said. Put it all on my account for now. Nonsense, Madeline interjected firmly. We have our own funds. From a hidden pocket in her dress, she produced a small velvet pouch. Jewelry we can sell if necessary. Zachariah nodded, respecting her desire for independence. As you wish, Miss Silverwood. Mrs. Carson showed the sisters to adjacent rooms on the second floor. Once they were settled, Zachariah prepared to take his leave. Mr. Sullivan, Madeline called, stepping into the hallway. The lamplight caught the copper highlights in her auburn hair, and for the first time, Zachariah noticed the dusting of freckles across her nose. We owe you our lives. I don't know how to thank you properly. No thanks needed, Miss Silverwood. Any decent man would have done the same. A sad smile crossed her face. I've known precious few decent men in my life, Mr. Sullivan. My father would have left us there to perish rather than risk us gaining our freedom. The raw honesty in her voice stirred something in Zachariah's chest. You're safe now. Get some rest. We can talk more in the morning. Madeline nodded, hesitating before adding, Will you be nearby when Father returns from Santa Fe? I'll be around, he promised. My room is at the end of the hall. If you need anything, day or night, just knock. Relief washed over her features. Good night then, Mr. Sullivan, and thank you again. As Zachariah returned to his own room at the boarding house, he found himself unable to shake the image of Madeline Silverwood's face from his mind. There was a quiet strength about her that he admired, a dignity that years of her father's cruelty hadn't managed to extinguish. And beneath that composed exterior, he sensed a fierce intelligence and passion carefully restrained. For the first time in years, Zachariah felt a pull toward someone other than the next town on the horizon. It was an unfamiliar feeling, one that both intrigued and unsettled him. His life as a drifter didn't allow for attachments, and getting involved with Thaddeus Silverwood's daughter would surely bring trouble. Yet as he drifted off to sleep that night, it was Madeline's green eyes that followed him into his dreams. Morning brought a flurry of activity to Placida's. News of the Silverwood mansion fire and the rescue of the three sisters spread through town like wildfire. By breakfast, the boarding house dining room was abuzz with whispered conversations that fell silent when Zachariah entered. Mrs. Carson served him coffee and eggs, leaning close as she refilled his cup. Those poor girls haven't come down yet. I checked on them earlier, sleeping like angels, all three in one bed huddled together. Lord knows what that monster put them through. They'll need time, Zachariah replied quietly. And privacy. Make sure the gossips give them space. Mrs. Carson nodded solemnly. I'll do my best, but you know how people talk. Thaddeus Silverwood's daughters suddenly appearing in town after being hidden away for years. It's the most exciting thing to happen in Placida's since the Silver Strike. Zachariah had just finished his breakfast when Madeline appeared in the dining room doorway. She wore a simple blue dress that Mrs. Carson must have loaned her, her hair neatly braided over one shoulder. Despite the borrowed clothes and the faint shadows beneath her eyes, she carried herself with unmistakable grace. Several diners stared openly, but Madeline ignored them, walking directly to Zachariah's table. "Good morning, Mr. Sullivan," she greeted him, her voice soft but steady. "May I join you?" Zachariah stood, pulling out a chair for her. "Of course, Miss Silverwood. How are you feeling today?" "Better, thank you." She accepted a cup of coffee from Mrs. Carson with a grateful smile. "My sisters are still resting. Charlotte was quite overcome last night." "That's understandable. It was a harrowing experience." Madeline's fingers tightened around her cup. "The fire was terrifying, yes, but—" She hesitated, glancing around at the other diners before continuing in a lower voice. "Being locked in that cellar wasn't new for us, Mr. Sullivan. Father has used it as punishment since we were children, usually for a day at most, but this time—" She shuddered slightly. 3 days with only enough water and bread to keep us alive. He said we needed to learn our lesson." Zachariah fought to keep his expression neutral despite the anger rising within him. What could possibly warrant such treatment? Marguerite was caught speaking to the new stable hand. "Just talking, nothing more." Father flew into a rage. "Said we were disgracing our mother's memory with our wanton behavior." A bitter smile crossed her face. "My mother died when Charlotte was born. I was barely 10 years old. Since then, Father has become increasingly paranoid about protecting us from the world." "That's not protection," Zachariah said flatly. "It's imprisonment." "Yes." Madeline met his eyes directly. "Which is why we cannot return to him, Mr. Sullivan. We've endured his control for years, but this time, I fear what he might do when he discovers we've escaped." Zachariah nodded slowly. "What do you plan to do?" "We have some jewelry we can sell. It should give us enough money to leave New Mexico territory entirely. Perhaps go east, where father has no influence. Running isn't easy,
This
Zachariah
story was
said,
posted on the
thinking of his
channel The
own
Rusty
years of
Saddle.
drifting.
Please do not repost it in any
Especially
form.
for 3 women alone. Madeline's chin lifted slightly. We're stronger than we look, Mr. Sullivan, and we're quick learners. We've had little else to do but read and study for most of our lives. I don't doubt your strength or intelligence, Miss Silverwood. But the world can be dangerous, particularly for women traveling alone. Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion at the boarding house entrance. The door burst open to reveal Jenkins, the mining foreman, his face grim. "Sullivan," he called, striding toward their table. "Just got word. Silverwood's on his way back from Santa Fe. Be here by nightfall." Madeline's face paled, but she maintained her composure. "Thank you for the warning, Mr. Jenkins." Jenkins twisted his hat in his hands, clearly uncomfortable. "There's more, miss. He's bringing men with him. Hired guns from Santa Fe, according to the telegram operator." Zachariah's expression darkened. "How many?" "4, maybe 5. Word is he's in a rage about the fire. And—" Jenkins glanced apologetically at Madeline, "about his daughters being in town." After Jenkins left, Madeline sat in silent contemplation, her coffee forgotten. Finally, she looked up at Zachariah, determination hardening her features. "We need to leave today, before he arrives." Zachariah nodded. "I agree, but you'll need help." He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Miss Silverwood, I know we've only just met, but I'm offering to escort you and your sisters to safety. I know the territory, the safe routes, the people who can be trusted." Surprise flickered across Madeline's face. "Why would you risk my father's wrath for us?" Zachariah considered his answer carefully. The truth was, he wasn't entirely sure himself. Something about Madeline Silverwood and her sister's plight had awakened a protective instinct he'd thought long buried after his ranger days. And beyond that, there was something about Madeline herself that drew him in a connection he couldn't explain. "Let's just say I've seen enough injustice in my life," he finally replied, "and I've walked away too many times when I should have stood my ground." Madeline studied him for a long moment, as if searching for some hidden motive in his eyes. Finally, she nodded. "Very well, Mr. Sullivan, we accept your help. When should we leave?" "As soon as possible. Pack whatever you can carry easily. I'll arrange for horses and supplies." Zachariah spent the morning making preparations while the Silverwood sisters gathered their meager belongings. He purchased 3 sturdy horses from the livery stable, loaded them with provisions, and collected his payment from the mining company for the previous month's work. By noon, they were ready to depart. Madeline and her sisters appeared at the back entrance of the boarding house, dressed in practical riding clothes that Mrs. Carson had somehow procured on short notice. Charlotte, the youngest, still looked frightened, but there was determination in her stance as she approached her horse. Marguerite helped her mount before swinging easily into her own saddle, revealing an unexpected familiarity with horseback riding. Noting Zachariah's surprised expression, Madeline explained as she mounted her own horse. "Our mother loved riding. She insisted we learn before she died. Father continued our lessons for years afterward, though always within the confines of our estate." "That's fortunate," Zachariah commented, climbing atop Thunder. "It'll make our journey easier." They left Placida's by a back trail, avoiding the main road where they might be spotted. Zachariah led them northwest, intending to follow less traveled paths toward the territorial capital of Santa Fe, where they could catch a stagecoach or train heading east. As they rode, he explained his plan. "We'll avoid the main routes where your father might have men watching. It'll add a day or 2 to our journey, but it's safer." "Where exactly are we heading?" Marguerite asked, adjusting her hat against the midday sun. I have a friend with a ranch about 20 miles from here. We can rest there tonight, then continue on towards Santa Fe." Zachariah glanced at Madeline, riding beside him. "Unless you have another destination in mind, St. Louis," she replied after a moment's consideration. "Our mother had a cousin there. We've never met her, but father mentioned her occasionally. It's the only family connection we know of." Zachariah nodded. "St. Louis is a good choice. Large enough to get lost in, far enough away that your father's influence won't reach." They rode in silence for a time, the rhythmic sound of hoofbeats and the occasional call of a hawk the only sounds breaking the quiet of the New Mexico wilderness. The landscape around them was ruggedly beautiful red rock formations, rising majestically against the clear blue sky, desert flora, adding splashes of color to the earth-toned terrain. Charlotte, who had been quiet most of the morning, suddenly gasped in delight as a family of deer crossed their path in the distance. "It's so beautiful out here," she whispered. "I never imagined the world could be so vast." Zachariah felt a pang of sympathy for the young woman. To be denied even the simple pleasure of nature's beauty seemed a particularly cruel form of imprisonment. "Have you three truly never left the estate?" he asked. "Not since Mother died," Marguerite answered. "Father took us to Santa Fe once a year for new clothes and such until I turned 16. Then he decided it was too dangerous for young women of our station to be seen in public. After that, dressmakers and tutors came to us." "How did you bear it?" Zachariah couldn't imagine being confined to one property for over a decade. "We had each other," Madeline said simply. "And books." Father's library was extensive. Through reading, we could escape, at least in our minds. As the day progressed, Zachariah found himself increasingly impressed by the Silverwood sisters. Despite their sheltered upbringing, they rode with determination, made few complaints despite the physical demands of the journey, and maintained a quiet dignity that spoke of inner resilience. By late afternoon, they crested a hill that overlooked a small valley. In the distance, a modest ranch house stood surrounded by cottonwood trees, with several outbuildings and corrals completing the homestead. "Daniel Martinez's place," Zachariah explained. "We served together in the Rangers years ago. He's a good man, married a local woman, and settled down to raise horses." "Will he help us?" Charlotte asked anxiously. "Without question," Zachariah assured her. "Daniel understands about standing against injustice." As they approached the ranch, a man emerged from the barn, shading his eyes against the setting sun. Upon recognizing Zachariah, he broke into a wide grin and waved enthusiastically. "Sullivan," Daniel called out, striding toward them as they dismounted. "Been too long, amigo." The two men embraced briefly before Zachariah introduced the Silverwood sisters. Daniel's wife, Elena, soon joined them, her welcoming smile putting the women at ease as she ushered them into the house with promises of hot food and comfortable beds. Later that evening, after the sisters had retired to their room, Zachariah sat with Daniel on the porch, sharing a bottle of whiskey as he explained their situation. "Silverwood," Daniel muttered, shaking his head. "Man's got a reputation all the way to Santa Fe. Rich as Midas and twice as cold-hearted." "He's dangerous," Zachariah agreed, "and he won't let his daughters go easily." Daniel studied his old friend's face in the dim lamplight. "There's more to this than just helping three ladies in distress, isn't there?" Zachariah took a slow sip of whiskey before answering. "The eldest, Madeline, there's something about her, a strength, a dignity despite everything she's been through." A knowing smile spread across Daniel's face. "Never thought I'd see the day." Zachariah Sullivan, the eternal drifter, finally caught by a woman's charms. "It's not like that," Zachariah protested, though without much conviction. I respect her, that's all. For now, Daniel chuckled. But I see the way you look at her, and how she watches you when you're not looking. Zachariah's head
This story
snapped
was
up.
posted on the
She
channel The
watches
Rusty
me,
Saddle.
like a
Please do
woman
not
seeing
repost
water
it in
after
any
crossing
form.
the desert. Daniel refilled their glasses. What will you do when you get them to St. Louis? The question caught Zachariah off guard. He hadn't thought beyond ensuring the sisters' safety. His life had been one of constant movement for so long that the idea of stopping, of staying, seemed almost foreign. I don't know, he admitted. I suppose I'll head back this way eventually. Daniel gave him a sidelong glance. Or you could consider putting down roots. 5 years of running is a long time, Zach. Whatever happened in El Paso? I don't want to talk about El Paso, Zachariah cut him off sharply, the old memories still too painful to revisit. Daniel raised his hands in surrender. Fair enough. But consider this. Maybe helping these women isn't just about their freedom. Maybe it's about yours too. Zachariah pondered his friend's words long into the night, unable to sleep despite the comfortable bed. From the adjacent room, he could occasionally hear the soft murmur of the sisters' voices as they too lay awake, perhaps contemplating their uncertain future. The sound of Madeline's gentle laughter at something one of her sisters said stirred something in his chest, a longing he'd denied himself for years. Could there be a life beyond endless wandering? A purpose greater than simply outrunning his past? Dawn arrived with a sense of urgency. Zachariah woke the sisters early, and after a hearty breakfast provided by Alina, they prepared to continue their journey. Daniel supplied them with additional provisions and fresh horses. The animals are yours to keep, he insisted when Zachariah tried to pay him. Consider it my contribution to a worthy cause. As they mounted up to leave, Daniel pulled Zachariah aside for a final word. Word came in last night. Silverwood reached Placida's and is in a fury. He's offering a reward for information on his daughter's whereabouts. Zachariah's expression hardened. How much? $500. Enough to tempt a lot of people in these hard times. Then we'd best be extra cautious. We'll avoid settlements entirely. Daniel nodded, gripping Zachariah's shoulder. There's an old miner's cabin in the Ortiz Mountains. You remember it. About a day's ride northeast of here. It's isolated, good place to lay low if you need to. I remember. Thanks, Daniel. They rode out as the sun cleared the eastern horizon, keeping to less traveled trails and woodland paths. Zachariah set a brisk pace, aware that Thaddeus Silverwood would have men searching every road leading from Placida's by now. The sisters kept up admirably, though by midday, Charlotte was showing signs of fatigue. They stopped briefly by a small stream to rest the horses and eat a cold lunch of bread, dried meat, and apples. How much farther to Santa Fe? Marguerite asked, splashing cool water on her face. At this pace, 3 days, Zachariah answered. But we may need to adjust our route if I hear of search parties ahead. Madeline, who had been watching the horizon, turned to him with concern. We're being followed. Zachariah followed her gaze but saw nothing. You're sure? She nodded firmly. I've been watching for the past hour. There's dust on the ridge we passed earlier. 3 riders, maybe 4. Impressed by her observational skills, Zachariah climbed a nearby rock formation for a better view. With his spyglass, he could just make out distant figures on horseback, following their trail. She's right, he said grimly, rejoining the group. 4 riders moving fast, could be Silverwood's men. Charlotte's face paled. What do we do? Zachariah considered their options quickly. We split up. There's a box canyon about 2 miles east of here. You 3 head there and wait. I'll lead the pursuit away, then circle back to find you. No, Madeline said firmly. We stay together. Miss Silverwood, Madeline, she corrected him. After all we've been through, I think first names are appropriate. Despite the tension of the moment, a small smile tugged at Zachariah's lips. Madeline, then. But my plan stands. I can move faster alone, and I know this territory. Those men are likely after the reward, not looking for a fight with an armed man. Reluctantly, Madeline agreed to the plan. Zachariah gave her detailed directions to the canyon, along with his spare revolver. "You know how to use this?" he asked. "Point and pull the trigger," she replied with unexpected confidence. "Father insisted we learn to shoot, one of the few useful skills he taught us." Zachariah nodded approvingly. "Only use it if absolutely necessary. I'll find you before nightfall." He watched them ride eastward before turning Thunder in the opposite direction, making sure to leave obvious tracks for the pursuers to follow. Once the sisters were out of sight, he spurred his horse to a gallop, hoping to draw the men far enough away to ensure the women's safety. For over an hour, Zachariah led his pursuers on a winding chase through increasingly rugged terrain. Occasionally, he caught glimpses of them, 4 men riding hard, determination evident in their posture. They were gaining ground, their fresh horses outpacing Thunder, who had already covered significant distance that day. Finally, Zachariah reached a narrow pass between 2 rocky outcroppings, a perfect spot for an ambush. He dismounted, sending Thunder ahead with a slap to the rump, then scrambled up the rocks to wait. The 4 riders appeared minutes later, slowing as they entered the pass. From his vantage point, Zachariah recognized 2 of them hired guns known to work for wealthy ranchers throughout the territory. The other 2 were strangers, but their well-worn gun belts and watchful eyes marked them as experienced mercenaries. "Tracks lead straight through," one called to the others. "He's not far ahead." "Silverwood said alive if possible," another reminded them. "Dead if necessary." Zachariah's jaw tightened at the confirmation of his suspicions. Drawing his revolver, he aimed carefully and fired a shot that kicked up dust directly in front of the lead rider's horse. The animal reared in panic, nearly throwing its rider. "That's far enough," Zachariah called from his position. "Next shot won't miss." The men drew their weapons, scanning the rocks. "Sullivan," the lead rider shouted, "we just want the Silverwood girls. Hand them over and you can ride away with $100 in your pocket." "Not going to happen," Zachariah replied calmly. "Those women are under my protection." "Don't be a fool. Silverwood will never stop looking for them. You're backing the wrong horse in this race." "Maybe, but I'm still the one with the high ground and clear shots at all 4 of you. Ride away now and we can all live to see tomorrow." A tense silence followed as the men exchanged glances, clearly weighing their options. Finally, the leader holstered his weapon with a disgusted sigh. "This isn't over, Sullivan. Silverwood's doubled the reward, $1,000 now. Every gun for hire in the territory will be looking for those girls." "Then they'll all be disappointed," Zachariah replied evenly. "Ride out. Now." The men retreated reluctantly, throwing dark glances toward the rocks as they departed. Zachariah waited until they were well out of sight before descending. He whistled for Thunder, who had stopped to graze a few hundred yards away, then mounted and began the journey back to find the Silverwood sisters. It was late afternoon when he reached the box canyon. The entrance was narrow, barely wide enough for a horse to pass through, opening into a sheltered space with steep walls, a small spring, and enough grass to sustain their animals. "Madeline," he called cautiously as he entered. "It's Zachariah." The sisters emerged from behind a large boulder, relief evident on their faces. Charlotte rushed forward, surprising him with a quick embrace. "We heard gunshots," she exclaimed. "We feared the worst." Just warning shots, Zachariah assured her, dismounting. I sent them on their way, but they'll be back with reinforcements once they regroup. Madeline approached more slowly, her expression a mixture of relief
This story
and
was
concern.
posted on the channel The
Were
Rusty
they
Saddle.
father's men?
Please do not
Hired
repost it in
guns,
any form.
Zachariah confirmed. Your father has doubled the reward. It's $1,000 now. Marguerite let out a low whistle. That's a small fortune in these parts, which means we need to change our plans, Zachariah said, leading Thunder to the spring. We can't risk the main routes to Santa Fe now, too many eyes watching. What do you suggest? Madeline asked. Daniel mentioned an abandoned miner's cabin in the Ortiz Mountains. It's remote, hard to find if you don't know it's there. We can rest there for a few days until the initial search dies down, then continue north to Las Vegas. Las Vegas? Charlotte looked confused. Las Vegas, New Mexico territory, Zachariah clarified with a small smile. Not the one in Nevada. It's a growing town on the Santa Fe Trail. From there, we can catch the train east. They decided to remain in the canyon until morning, using the remaining daylight to rest and plan. Zachariah showed the sisters how to build a small, nearly smokeless fire, and they shared a simple meal as darkness fell. As night settled over the canyon, Madeline joined Zachariah at the mouth of the canyon where he stood watch. You should get some sleep, he told her. Tomorrow will be another long day. I'm not tired, she replied, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders against the desert night's chill. Too many thoughts. They stood in companionable silence for a time, the vast canopy of stars above them lending a sense of perspective to their troubles. I've never seen so many stars, Madeline finally said. At home, Father rarely allowed us outside after dark. The desert sky is something special, Zachariah agreed. Makes a man feel small, but in a good way. Reminds you that your troubles are just a tiny part of something much bigger. Madeline glanced at him curiously. What troubles are you trying to make small, Zachariah Sullivan? The direct question caught him off guard. For years, he'd avoided speaking about his past, preferring to leave those memories buried. But something about the quiet night and Madeline's gentle inquiry broke through his usual reticence. 5 years ago, I was a Texas Ranger, he began, his voice low. Had a partner named Thomas. Good man, best I ever knew. We were pursuing a gang that had robbed a bank in El Paso. Tracked them to a small town called Presidio on the Mexican border. Zachariah paused, the memories washing over him with painful clarity. It was supposed to be a simple arrest. We had the drop on them, but... He shook his head. There was a woman with them. I hesitated, worried she might get caught in the crossfire. That moment of hesitation cost Thomas his life. He took a bullet meant for me. I'm so sorry, Madeline said softly. The gang escaped across the border. I tracked them for months, finally caught up with them in a cantina in Chihuahua. There was a shootout. I killed 3 men that night. His voice grew distant. I've been wandering ever since, never staying anywhere long enough to form attachments. Figured it was safer that way for everyone. Madeline was quiet for a long moment before responding. You blame yourself for your partner's death. It wasn't a question, but Zachariah answered anyway. Every day. And you think by helping us you might somehow make amends for that moment of hesitation. Zachariah looked at her, surprised by her insight. Maybe, initially, but now. He struggled to articulate the shifting feelings within him. Now I'm helping because it's the right thing to do, because you and your sisters deserve freedom. Madeline's gaze was steady, unflinching. And because there's something between us, something neither of us expected. The directness of her statement left him momentarily speechless. In the moonlight, her features were softened, her green eyes reflecting the starlight above. Despite the circumstances that had brought them together, despite the danger still pursuing them, Zachariah couldn't deny the connection that had formed between them. "Yes," he finally admitted. "There is." Madeline moved closer, her hand finding his in the darkness. "I've spent my life reading about adventures and romance in books, Zachariah. I never expected to experience either." A small smile played at her lips. "Certainly not both at once." Before he could respond, she rose on tiptoe and pressed a gentle kiss to his cheek. "Thank you for giving us a chance at freedom. Whatever happens next, know that you've already changed our lives immeasurably." With that, she turned and walked back to where her sisters slept, leaving Zachariah staring after her, his heart beating with an unfamiliar rhythm of possibility and hope. The next morning dawned clear and cool. They broke camp early, erasing all signs of their presence before heading northeast toward the Ortiz Mountains. Zachariah set a careful pace, balancing the need for speed with concern for the horses and their riders. As they rode, he noticed a subtle shift in the dynamics between them. Madeline rode beside him more often, their conversations flowing more easily. Charlotte seemed to have overcome much of her initial fear, asking questions about the landscape and wildlife they encountered. Even Marguerite, the most reserved of the three, began to share stories of their childhood before their mother's death. By mid-afternoon, the terrain changed as they entered the foothills of the mountains. Pine trees replaced desert scrub, the air grew cooler, and rocky outcroppings provided both shelter and potential danger. Zachariah led them along game trails, avoiding the more established paths where they might be spotted. "The cabin should be in a valley just ahead," he told them as they crested a ridge, "if it's still standing after all these years." To his relief, the small log structure came into view as they descended into a sheltered valley. The cabin was weathered but intact, with a stream running nearby and enough clearing around it to spot anyone approaching. "It's not much," Zachariah said as they dismounted, "but it should be safe." "It's perfect," Madeline assured him, surveying their surroundings with approval. They set about making the cabin habitable, sweeping out dust and debris, gathering fresh pine boughs for bedding, and collecting firewood. By evening, they had transformed the abandoned shelter into a reasonably comfortable temporary home. Over dinner rabbit that Zachariah had managed to snare, supplemented with the last of their provisions, they discussed their next steps. "We should remain here 2 days," Zachariah suggested. "Give things time to quiet down before we make for Las Vegas. And if Father's men find us here?" Charlotte asked anxiously. "The cabin is well hidden," Zachariah assured her. "And I'll take precautions, set some warning signs along the likely approach routes, keep watch from the ridge. But if anyone does come, there's a cave system behind the waterfall upstream. You could hide there while I deal with any visitors." The reminder of the danger still pursuing them cast a pall over the evening. As they prepared for sleep, the sisters taking the cabin's single room while Zachariah made a bedroll near the door, Madeline lingered by the fireplace. "Do you truly believe we can escape him?" she asked quietly once her sisters had retired. Zachariah considered the question honestly. "Your father is powerful in this territory, but his reach has limits. Once we get you to St. Louis, you should be beyond his influence. And if he follows us there, then we'll deal with that when it comes." Zachariah moved to sit beside her on the rough-hewn bench. "Madeline, I won't let him take you back, any of you, I promise." She studied the dying embers of the fire, her profile illuminated by the soft glow. "When I was a child, before Mother died, Father was different. Stern, yes, but not cruel. He loved her deeply, her death. It broke something in him. His grief twisted into a kind of madness over the years. That doesn't excuse what he did to you and your sisters." "No," she agreed. "It doesn't. But sometimes I wonder if there might have been another path, If someone had intervened sooner, helped him face his grief differently. You can't blame yourself for his actions. I don't. Not anymore. Madeline turned to face him, her expression resolute. But I do wonder what will become of him now. Without us to control, what purpose will drive him? That's not your burden to carry, Zachariah said gently. A small smile crossed her face. You're right, of course. It's strange after years of having every moment of my life dictated by Father. The prospect of freedom is both exhilarating and terrifying. Freedom often is. And what will you do, Zachariah, when we reach St. Louis? Will you continue your wandering? The question hung in the air between them, loaded with unspoken implications. Zachariah had asked himself the same thing repeatedly over the past days. I don't know, he admitted finally.
This story
For
was
5
posted on the
years,
channel
moving
The
on has
Rusty
been my
Saddle.
answer to
Please do not
everything.
repost
It's
it in
become
any
a
form.
habit, I suppose. Some habits can be broken, Madeline said softly, her gaze holding his. If there's sufficient reason. Before he could respond, a noise from outside drew his attention, a faint but distinct crack of a twig breaking. Instantly alert, Zachariah motioned for silence. Drawing his revolver as he moved to the window, in the moonlight, he could make out shadowy figures moving among the trees at the edge of the clearing, at least 3 men approaching cautiously, weapons drawn. Wake your sisters, he whispered urgently to Madeline. Get to the cave behind the waterfall, now. Madeline hesitated only briefly before hurrying to rouse Marguerite and Charlotte. Zachariah moved to the back of the cabin, where a small window offered a potential escape route. They're coming from the south, he told them as they gathered their minimal belongings. Head northeast along the stream. Stay in the water to hide your tracks. The waterfall is about half a mile upstream. What about you? Madeline asked, her eyes wide with concern. I'll lead them away, then join you later. Seeing her about to protest, he added, It's our best chance, Madeline, please. After a moment's internal struggle, she nodded. Be careful. Zachariah helped the sisters through the window, watching as they disappeared into the darkness toward the stream. Once they were out of sight, he returned to the front of the cabin, considering his options. The approaching men hadn't surrounded the cabin, yet likely they weren't entirely sure if they'd found the right place. He could use that uncertainty to his advantage. Moving silently, Zachariah extinguished the remaining embers in the fireplace and positioned himself by the door. When the first man reached the cabin's porch, Zachariah flung the door open, catching him off guard. A quick strike with the butt of his revolver sent the man sprawling. Immediately, shots rang out from the tree line. Zachariah returned fire, aiming high to avoid hitting anyone while making it appear he was shooting to kill. Using the confusion, he dashed around the side of the cabin toward where the horses were tethered. A bullet splintered wood near his head as he untied Thunder, but he managed to swing into the saddle and spur the horse into motion, heading west away from the direction the sisters had fled. More gunfire followed him, but the darkness and his zigzagging path through the trees made him a difficult target. Once he was certain he'd drawn all pursuit away from the cabin, Zachariah pushed Thunder to greater speed, intending to lose his pursuers in the rugged terrain before doubling back to find the sisters. For over an hour, he led the men on a wild chase through the mountains, using every trick he'd learned as a ranger to confuse and misdirect them. Finally, near a rocky outcropping above a steep ravine, he dismounted and sent Thunder ahead while he took position among the rocks. When the pursuers arrived, there were only 2 of them. They'd split up, likely to cover more ground. Zachariah recognized one as Jackson, a notorious bounty hunter known for bringing in quarry dead rather than alive. Give it up, Sullivan, Jackson called. Silverwood's offering $2,000 now for his daughters and $500 for your head, Sounds like I'm undervalued, Zachariah replied coolly, his voice echoing among the rocks to mask his position. Maybe, but dead men don't need money, the second man added. Last chance to walk away from this. I appreciate the offer, Zachariah said, but I've made promises I intend to keep. Your funeral, Jackson muttered, dismounting and drawing his rifle. What followed was a tense exchange of gunfire, with Zachariah using the superior cover of the rocks to his advantage. When Jackson made a dash for better position, Zachariah's shot caught him in the shoulder, spinning him to the ground with a howl of pain. The second man, seeing his partner down, lost his nerve. "This ain't worth dying for," he shouted, grabbing Jackson's reins and helping him back onto his horse. "This ain't over, Sullivan." As they retreated, Zachariah emerged cautiously from cover. Dawn was breaking, casting long shadows through the pines. He whistled for thunder, relieved when the loyal horse returned minutes later. Now he needed to find the sisters. The encounter had taken him farther from the cabin than he'd intended, and circling back would take time. He only hoped the third pursuer hadn't discovered the women's escape route. It was mid-morning when Zachariah finally approached the waterfall. He moved with extreme caution, alert for any sign of the remaining bounty hunter. The cascade of water tumbled some 20 feet from an overhanging rock face, creating a curtain of spray that concealed the entrance to a small cave behind it. "Madeline," he called softly as he entered the damp passage. "It's Zachariah." For a heart-stopping moment, there was no response. Then Madeline emerged from the shadows deeper in the cave, revolver in hand. When she recognized him, her face lit with relief. "Thank God," she breathed, lowering the weapon. "We heard gunfire." "Just a disagreement with some uninvited guests," Zachariah replied with a grim smile. "They've gone for now, but we should move on. Where are your sisters?" "Here," Marguerite called, appearing with Charlotte beside her. Both looked tired and damp from the spray of the waterfall, but unharmed. Quickly, Zachariah outlined a new plan. "We can't risk staying in this area. We'll head north immediately, avoid Las Vegas entirely, and make for Cimarron. It's a smaller town, less likely to have word of the reward." "How far?" Charlotte asked, fatigue evident in her voice. 2 days hard riding," Zachariah admitted, "but I know people there who can help us." They gathered their few possessions and departed immediately, Zachariah leading them along game trails and rarely used paths, always alert for pursuit. The day passed in tense silence, broken only by necessary communication as they navigated increasingly difficult terrain. By nightfall, they had covered impressive ground, reaching a high plateau that offered a commanding view of the surrounding countryside. They made a cold camp, no fire that might attract attention, and took turns keeping watch. During his shift, Zachariah noticed Madeline shivering despite her blanket. Silently, he removed his coat and draped it over her sleeping form. She stirred, looking up at him with drowsy gratitude. "You should rest," she murmured. "You've been awake most of the night." "I'm fine," he assured her, though exhaustion pulled at his limbs. "Sleep. We have another long day ahead." Instead of complying, she sat up, still wrapped in his coat. "You saved our lives again last night. We're not safe yet, but we will be because of you." She studied his face in the moonlight. "Why are you doing this, Zachariah? Truly. You could have walked away at any point, handed us over, collected the reward." Zachariah was quiet for a long moment, gathering thoughts he'd been avoiding examining too closely. "5 years ago, I failed someone who trusted me," he finally said. "I've been running from that failure ever since, but meeting you and your sisters—" He hesitated. "It reminded me of the man I used to be, the man who believed in standing up for what's right, no matter the cost." "And is that the only reason?" Madeline asked, her voice barely above a whisper, Zachariah met her gaze, finding himself unable to dissemble in the face of her directness. "No, it's not." The admission hung between them, fraught with possibilities neither of them had the luxury to explore while danger still pursued them. "When this is over," Madeline said, "when we're truly safe, we should finish this conversation." Zachariah nodded, a small
This
smile
story
touching
was
his
posted
lips.
on the channel The Rusty Saddle.
"I'd like
Please do
that."
not repost it
The
in
next
any
day
form.
brought new challenges. One of their horses pulled up lame, forcing them to double up Charlotte riding behind Marguerite and slowing their progress. Then, as they descended from the highlands toward more populated areas, they encountered a small group of travelers heading south. Zachariah tensed, hand moving to his revolver, but the family of settlers merely nodded in friendly greeting as they passed. Still, the encounter was a reminder that they were approaching civilization again, with all its attendant risks. By late afternoon, dark clouds gathered on the horizon, promising a summer storm. They pushed on, hoping to reach shelter before the weather broke, but luck wasn't with them. The rain began as a gentle patter, quickly intensifying into a downpour that reduced visibility to mere yards. "There's a line shack about a mile ahead," Zachariah shouted over the storm. Used by cattlemen during drives, they pressed forward, soaked to the skin and chilled by the driving rain. When the small wooden structure finally appeared through the curtain of water, it was a welcome sight despite its humble appearance. The interior was dusty but dry, with a small stone fireplace, a rough table with 2 chairs, and a set of bunks built into the wall. Zachariah quickly got a fire going while the sisters changed into their spare clothing, now their only dry garments. "How long will the storm last?" Charlotte asked, huddled near the fire with a blanket around her shoulders. "Hard to say," Zachariah replied, adding another log to the growing flames. "Could be an hour, could be all night. Mountain weather is unpredictable." Marguerite, ever practical, took stock of their provisions. "We're running low on food, just some jerky and hardtack left." "I saw rabbit tracks near the creek we crossed," Zachariah said. "Once the rain lets up, I can try to snare something for dinner." As predicted, the storm persisted into the evening. While the sisters organized their meager supplies and made the shack more habitable, Zachariah braved the elements long enough to set several snares and check on the horses, which were sheltered in a lean-to adjacent to the cabin. Upon his return, soaked once more, he found the interior transformed. The sisters had swept out the dust, arranged their bedding neatly on the bunks, and even found an old tin pot which they'd filled with water for tea. "You've been busy," he remarked, removing his dripping coat. "Idle hands invite the devil's work," Madeline quoted with a smile. "Or so our governess always said." "Seems she was right," Zachariah chuckled, accepting a cup of hot tea gratefully. As the evening progressed, the tension of the past days began to ease somewhat. The steady drumming of rain on the roof, the warmth of the fire, and the relative security of their shelter created an atmosphere almost resembling normalcy. Charlotte even asked Zachariah to tell them stories of his travels, listening with wide-eyed interest as he described the vastness and variety of the American West. "I've always wanted to see the ocean," she confessed wistfully. "Is it truly as endless as they say?" "Even more so," Zachariah assured her. "The first time I saw the Pacific, I stood on the shore for hours, just watching the waves roll in. Makes a man feel small in the best possible way." "Like your desert stars," Madeline remarked softly. Their eyes met across the small room, and something passed between them, an understanding, a shared appreciation for beauty that transcended their current circumstances. The moment was broken when Marguerite yawned dramatically. "Well, I for one am exhausted. Charlotte, shall we retire?" Charlotte looked confused for a moment, then caught her sister's meaningful glance toward Madeline and Zachariah. "Oh, yes, of course. Good night, everyone." The two younger sisters climbed into the bunks, leaving Madeline and Zachariah alone by the fire. For a time, they sat in companionable silence, listening to the rain and the occasional pop of the fire. "They're not very subtle, my sisters," Madeline finally said, a hint of amusement in her voice. "Subtlety is overrated," Zachariah replied with a smile. "Besides, I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you alone." Madeline drew her knees up to her chest, wrapping her arms around them. "What shall we talk about, Mr. Sullivan? The weather, literature, or perhaps the bounty hunters still pursuing us? How about the future?" he suggested, his voice softening. "After all this is over." "My future has always been decided for me," Madeline mused. "First by father, then by circumstance. The idea that I might choose my own path is overwhelming at times. What would you choose if you could have anything?" Madeline considered the question seriously. "I'd like to teach, I think. I've always loved books, ideas. Sharing that with others, especially young women who might otherwise be denied education, seems worthwhile." Zachariah nodded. "You'd make an excellent teacher, patient, thoughtful, observant." "And what about you?" she asked, turning the question back to him. What would Zachariah Sullivan choose if he weren't bound by the past? The question cut closer to his heart than he expected. For years, he'd avoided thinking beyond the next town, the next job. The idea of wanting something, of laying claim to a future, had seemed impossible after El Paso. "I don't know," he admitted honestly. "For so long, moving on has been my only plan. And now," Zachariah met her gaze directly, "now I'm considering the merits of staying put. Finding someone worth building a life around." The implication hung in the air between them, neither willing to voice it more explicitly while their future remained so uncertain. Yet something had shifted, a possibility had been acknowledged. A door opened that neither seemed eager to close. The storm continued through the night, finally tapering off near dawn. Zachariah, who had slept fitfully on the floor near the door, rose early to check his snares. To his satisfaction, two had caught rabbits enough to provide a decent meal before they continued their journey. When he returned to the cabin, he found Madeline alone, stoking the fire to life again. "My sisters are fetching water," she explained, taking the rabbits from him. "They insisted I rest a bit longer, but I've never been one for idleness." Together, they prepared a simple but nourishing breakfast. As they worked side by side, Zachariah found himself watching Madeline's hands, elegant despite the calluses forming from days on horseback, capable and sure in their movements. Hands that had known luxury but adapted quickly to hardship. "What?" she asked, catching his gaze. "Just admiring your resilience," he replied honestly. "Most women of your background would have faltered long before now." A smile touched her lips. "Most women of my background haven't spent years plotting escape from a tyrant father. Necessity breeds adaptation." When Charlotte and Marguerite returned with water, they all shared the meal, discussing the day's journey ahead. According to Zachariah, they could reach Cimarron by nightfall if they maintained a steady pace. "And from there?" Marguerite asked. "The Atchison, Topeka and Santa Fe Railway has a station at Raton, just north of Cimarron," Zachariah explained. "You can take the train east from there first to Kansas City, then on to St. Louis." "You keep saying you," Charlotte observed. "Not we." Zachariah hesitated, glancing briefly at Madeline before responding. "I haven't decided that far ahead yet. But you're not abandoning us in Cimarron," Charlotte pressed, anxiety creeping into her voice. "No," he assured her quickly. "I'll see you safely onto that train at the very least." The answer seemed to satisfy Charlotte, but Madeline's thoughtful expression suggested she understood the uncertainty behind his words. The question of his own future, whether it might include her, remained unresolved. They departed the line shack mid-morning, traveling north through terrain still muddy from the previous night's storm. The air was fresh and cool, the landscape washed clean, vibrant in the aftermath of the rain.
This
Under
story was
different
posted on the channel
circumstances,
The Rusty
it might have been a
Saddle.
pleasant
Please do
journey.
not repost it in any form.
Around midday, as they crossed a wide meadow, Zachariah noticed dust rising in the distance behind them. Pulling out his spyglass, he confirmed his fears. Riders, at least 6 of them, moving fast in their direction. "We've got company," he announced grimly. "Too many to fight. We'll have to outrun them." They urged their horses to a gallop, making for the tree line ahead. Once within the forest, they might have a chance to lose their pursuers or at least find defensible ground. The chase was relentless. Despite their head start and Zachariah's knowledge of the terrain, their tired horses couldn't maintain the necessary pace. The gap between them and their pursuers steadily narrowed. "There's a river ahead," Zachariah called as they crested a hill. "If we can cross it, we might gain some time." The Cimarron River was swollen from the recent rain, its usually placid current transformed into a churning, muddy torrent. They reined in at the bank, Zachariah quickly assessing their options. "It's too dangerous to cross on horseback," Madeline observed, eyeing the rushing water. "We don't have a choice," Zachariah replied. "There's a ford about a quarter-mile downstream, shallow enough to cross safely even now." They rode hard along the riverbank, the sounds of pursuit growing louder behind them. When they reached the ford, Zachariah dismounted to test the water's depth with a long branch. "It's passable," he announced. "I'll go first with Charlotte. Madeline, you and Marguerite follow right after." Helping Charlotte onto his horse, Zachariah led Thunder into the river. The current was strong, pulling at the horse's legs, but the animal was steady and powerful. They reached the opposite bank safely, and Zechariah quickly helped Charlotte dismount before turning back to watch the others cross. Madeline and Marguerite entered the water together, their horses struggling more than Thunder had against the current. Halfway across, Marguerite's mount stumbled on a submerged rock, nearly throwing her. She cried out, clutching the saddle horn desperately as the horse regained its footing. Behind them, their pursuers had reached the riverbank. One raised a rifle, taking aim. "Get down," Zachariah shouted, drawing his revolver and firing at the men on the far shore. His shots forced them to take cover, buying precious seconds for the sisters to complete their crossing. Once they were all safely across, they rode hard for the tree line ahead, the river temporarily halting their pursuers. But Zechariah knew the respite would be brief. The men would find another crossing point soon enough. "We need to split up," he decided as they entered the forest. "They're after the 3 of you, not me. If we separate, I can lead them away while you continue to Cimarron." "No," Madeline protested immediately. "We stay together." "Madeline, be reasonable. This is your best chance." "Our best chance is together," she insisted. "You know this territory, we don't. Without you, we might never reach Cimarron." Zachariah wanted to argue further, but the determination in her eyes told him it would be futile. And deep down, he knew she was right. 3 women alone in unfamiliar wilderness would be vulnerable to more dangers than just Silverwood's men. "All right," he conceded, "but we'll have to be smart about this. There's an old trapper's cabin about 5 miles northeast of here. If we can reach it by nightfall, we might be able to hold them off until morning." They pushed on through the forest, taking game trails and stream beds to hide their tracks whenever possible. The pursuing riders had indeed found another crossing point, but the delay and Zachariah's wilderness skills had given them a significant lead. By late afternoon, They reached a small valley nestled between two ridges. At the far end stood a sturdy log cabin the trapper's refuge Zachariah had mentioned. "It's not much," he said as they approached, "but it's built like a fortress. Old man Jenkins, who lived here, was paranoid about Indian attacks. The cabin proved to be as defensible as promised. Thick log walls with only two small windows, a heavy door reinforced with iron bands, and a root cellar that could serve as a last refuge if needed. They stabled the horses in a small lean-to at the back and set about preparing for the inevitable confrontation. "I count 12 rounds for the revolver," Madeline reported, checking the weapon Zachariah had given her. "I have 26 for my rifle and 18 for the revolver," Zachariah added. "Not much, but it'll have to do." They worked efficiently, moving furniture to barricade the windows, filling every available container with water from the nearby spring, and taking stock of the cabin's meager supplies. As darkness fell, they ate a cold meal of the remaining provisions, saving the last of their firewood in case they needed light during the night. "Try to get some rest," Zachariah advised the sisters as they finished eating. "I'll keep watch." Charlotte and Marguerite settled onto pallets in the corner, exhaustion quickly pulling them into sleep despite the tension. Madeline, however, joined Zachariah by the window, revolver in her lap. "You should sleep too," he told her softly. She shook her head. "I couldn't, even if I tried. Too much depends on tonight." They sat in companionable silence for a time, the darkness outside absolute save for the occasional flash of heat lightning on the distant horizon. Finally, Madeline spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. "If we don't make it through this—" "We will," Zachariah interrupted firmly. "But if we don't," she persisted, "I want you to know that I don't regret any of it. Even with all the danger, these past days have been the first time in my adult life that I've felt truly alive." The admission touched something deep within him. "I understand that feeling. Do you?" She turned to face him, her features barely visible in the dim light. "Before we met, I thought I'd resigned myself to my fate. A life controlled by father, eventually married off to some business associate of his for political or financial advantage." She shook her head. "But then you broke down that cellar door, and suddenly there were possibilities I'd never dared imagine." "Like teaching," Zachariah offered with a small smile. "Like teaching," she agreed. "Like seeing the ocean Charlotte dreams of, like—" She hesitated, then continued softly, "like falling in love on my own terms." The words hung between them, charged with meaning. Slowly, Zachariah reached out to take her hand, his calloused fingers entwining with hers. "Madeline," he began, his voice rough with emotion. Before he could continue, a sound from outside froze them both, the distant but unmistakable approach of riders. "They've found us," Zachariah said grimly, reaching for his rifle. "Wake your sisters." The confrontation they'd been dreading had arrived. As Madeline roused Charlotte and Marguerite, Zachariah took position by the window, peering cautiously into the darkness. The approaching riders had stopped just beyond clear sight of the cabin, but he could hear low voices as they conferred. "How many?" Madeline asked, joining him with the revolver ready. "Hard to say. At least 4, maybe more." A voice called out from the darkness. "Sullivan, we know you're in there. Send out the Silverwood girls and you can ride away from this." Zachariah recognized the voice Jackson, the bounty hunter he'd wounded earlier. "And if I refuse, then we burn you out," Jackson shouted back. "There's nowhere left to run, Sullivan. Silverwood's offering 10,000 now, dead or alive. Think about it." Zachariah glanced at Madeline, whose face had paled at the mention of her father's escalating reward. "He's bluffing about burning the cabin," he assured her quietly. "These logs won't catch easily." "What do we do?" Charlotte whispered, her eyes wide with fear. We hold out until dawn, Zachariah replied, his mind racing through their options. They won't risk a frontal assault against an entrenched position at night. Come morning, we might be able to spot reinforcements from town. What reinforcements? Marguerite asked skeptically. Cimarron's only about 10 miles north, Zachariah explained. If we can get a message there. He paused, considering the desperate plan forming in his mind.
This
The root
story was
cellar had
posted
a
on the
small
channel
air
The Rusty
shaft that
Saddle.
emerged from
Please
the
do not
hillside
repost
behind
it
the
in any
cabin.
form.
It would be a tight squeeze, but someone small might be able to crawl through it. Charlotte, he said, turning to the youngest sister. You're the smallest of us. Do you think you could crawl through the root cellar's air shaft? Her eyes widened, but she nodded bravely. I believe so. What would I need to do? Get to Cimarron. Find Marshal Davis, tell him Zachariah Sullivan needs help, and there's bounty hunters operating illegally in his jurisdiction. He owes me a favor from years back. That's too dangerous, Madeline protested, sending her out alone. They're watching the front of the cabin, Zachariah countered. The air shaft exits in the trees behind us. If she stays in the forest, uses the ridgeline for guidance, she can reach town by morning. Madeline looked torn, glancing between her youngest sister and Zachariah. Finally, she turned to Charlotte. It has to be your decision. Charlotte straightened her shoulders, a new determination entering her expression. I'll go. I can do this. While Madeline and Marguerite prepared Charlotte for her journey, dressing her in the darkest clothes they had, arming her with a small knife, and giving her the last of their water, Zachariah maintained a tense dialogue with the men outside, keeping their attention focused on the cabin's front. You're making a mistake, Jackson, he called. Silverwood will never pay what he promised. Men like him don't value anyone but themselves. Maybe, Jackson shouted back, but 10,000 is worth the risk. You've got till dawn to reconsider, Sullivan. After that, we come in shooting. Once Charlotte was ready, they moved quietly to the root cellar. The small underground space was musty but dry, with shelves still holding the previous occupants' preserved foods. At the back, just as Zachariah remembered, was a narrow shaft that angled upward toward the surface. It gets wider near the exit, he assured Charlotte, who eyed the opening with trepidation. Just keep moving forward. Once you're outside, head north along the ridge. You'll see the lights of Cimarron in the valley. Charlotte embraced each of her sisters tightly, tears in her eyes but determination in her voice. I won't fail you, she promised. We know you won't, Madeline replied, hugging her fiercely. Be safe. With a final nod to Zachariah, Charlotte squeezed into the narrow passage and began crawling upward. They listened anxiously until the sounds of her progress faded, then returned to the main room of the cabin. Now what? Marguerite asked, the strain of the situation evident in her voice. Now we wait, Zachariah replied, checking his weapons again. And we pray your sister reaches Cimarron in time. The night stretched endlessly. Occasionally, one of Jackson's men would call out, attempting to goad them into responding or making a run for it. Zachariah maintained enough of a dialogue to convince them. Everyone was still inside the cabin, but otherwise focused on conserving their ammunition and keeping watch for any attempt to approach. Madeline and Marguerite took turns resting, though neither could sleep for more than a few minutes at a time. As the hours passed, Zachariah found himself increasingly aware of Madeline's presence beside him, her steady breathing, the faint scent of wildflowers that somehow clung to her despite days on the trail, the quiet strength that radiated from her even in this desperate situation. Do you think Charlotte made it through the shaft? She whispered during one of the periods of silence from outside. She's smart and determined, Zachariah replied, like her sister. A small smile touched Madeline's lips at the compliment. Our mother used to say Charlotte had the heart of a lion in the body of a dove. A fitting description. They fell silent again, listening to the night sounds beyond the cabin walls. Finally, Madeline spoke again, her voice so low Zachariah had to lean closer to hear. Earlier, before they arrived, I spoke of falling in love on my own terms. She kept her eyes fixed on the window, not looking at him. I want you to know I wasn't speaking hypothetically. The admission sent a surge of emotion through Zachariah's chest. For years, he'd avoided entanglements, convinced he didn't deserve happiness after what happened in El Paso. Yet in just days, Madeline Silverwood had breached walls he'd thought impenetrable. "Madeline," he began, his voice rough with feeling. A sudden crash from outside interrupted him, the sound of breaking glass followed by a whoosh of flames. Through the window, they saw a burning torch arcing through the air toward the cabin. "They're trying to smoke us out," Marguerite exclaimed, rushing to join them. The torch landed on the cabin's roof with a thud. More followed, some hitting the walls, others the roof. Despite Zachariah's earlier assurance, the dry summer had made the old logs more vulnerable than he'd anticipated. "The root cellar," he decided quickly. "It's our best defense now. Gather what you can carry: water, ammunition, anything useful." As they prepared to retreat to the cellar, smoke began filtering through the roof. Outside, emboldened by their tactics' apparent success, Jackson and his men were growing more aggressive. "Running out of time, Sullivan," Jackson called. "Fire's only going to get worse." Zachariah helped the sisters down into the root cellar, passing supplies down before joining them and pulling the trapdoor shut. The underground space was cooler, but smoke was already beginning to seep through the floorboards above. "We can't stay here long," Madeline observed, coughing slightly. Zachariah examined the air shaft that Charlotte had escaped through. "It's our only option now. Marguerite, you're next smallest. You should go first." Marguerite looked uncertain but nodded bravely. With Zachariah's help, she managed to squeeze into the narrow passage, calling back that it did indeed widen as she progressed. "Your turn," Zachariah told Madeline once they were certain Marguerite had reached the outside. "Not without you," she insisted. "Madeline, there's no time to argue. I'll be right behind you." After a moment's hesitation, she relented, allowing him to help her into the shaft. As she crawled forward, Zachariah gathered the last of their supplies, knowing that once outside they would still need to evade Jackson and his men in the darkness. By the time Zachariah entered the shaft himself, smoke was filling the root cellar. The passage was even tighter for his broader frame, but determination drove him forward inch by painful inch. About halfway through, the shaft narrowed further where the earth had shifted over time. Zachariah found himself stuck, unable to move forward or back. Panic threatened to overwhelm him as he struggled against the confining earth, the smoke growing thicker behind him. Then he heard Madeline's voice from ahead. "Zachariah, reach for my hand." Stretching his arm as far as possible through the narrow gap, he felt her fingers grasp his. With her pulling and him pushing against the walls of the shaft, he managed to squeeze through the constriction. Moments later, they emerged into the cool night air behind the cabin. Madeline and Marguerite helped him to his feet, all three gasping for breath. The cabin was now fully engulfed in flames, the fire casting a bright glow that would make moving undetected difficult. From the front of the structure, they could hear Jackson and his men shouting, still unaware of their escape. "The horses," Zachariah whispered, gesturing toward the small lean-to that had been hidden from the bounty hunter's view. "If we can reach them." They crept carefully through the shadows, the noise of the burning cabin masking their movements. The horses were panicked by the fire, but Zechariah managed to calm them enough to lead them quietly away from the blaze. Once they reached the tree line, they mounted quickly, Madeline with Zechariah, Marguerite on her own horse, leading Charlotte's mount as well. Without a word, they urged the animals forward, riding north along the ridge as Charlotte had earlier. Behind them, angry shouts indicated Jackson had discovered their escape. Gunshots rang out, but in the darkness, with the fire's glow interfering with
This
their
story
night
was
vision,
posted on the channel The
bounty
Rusty
hunter's
Saddle.
aim was
Please do
wild.
not repost it in any form.
They rode hard through the night, following the ridgeline as Zechariah had instructed Charlotte. By first light, they had put significant distance between themselves and their pursuers, though Zechariah knew Jackson wouldn't give up easily, not with $10,000 at stake. As dawn broke, they reached a vantage point overlooking the valley where Cimarron lay. The small town was just visible in the distance, a collection of buildings nestled along a river. "You think Charlotte made it?" Marguerite asked anxiously, scanning the trail ahead for any sign of her sister. "We have to believe she did," Madeline replied, her voice betraying her own worry. They continued toward town at a more measured pace, their horses exhausted from the night's hard riding. Zechariah remained vigilant, frequently checking behind them for pursuit. They were within a mile of Cimarron when Zechariah spotted movement ahead, riders, at least 6 of them, coming up the trail toward them. He immediately reined in, signaling the sisters to stop. "Could be Jackson's men," he warned, reaching for his rifle. But as the riders drew nearer, Zechariah recognized the lead figure, a tall man with a silver star pinned to his vest. Marshal Davis of Cimarron, with several deputies and one very familiar young woman riding alongside him. "Charlotte!" Marguerite cried out in relief. The groups converged quickly, Charlotte sliding from her horse to embrace her sisters tearfully while Marshal Davis approached Zechariah. "Sullivan," the lawman greeted him with a nod. "Still finding trouble wherever you go, I see. Or it finds me," Zechariah replied with a tired smile. "Thanks for coming, Davis. This young lady was mighty persuasive," Davis said, gesturing toward Charlotte. "Arrived at my door before dawn, half dead with exhaustion but insisting I gather my men immediately." He shook his head in admiration. "Said her sisters and some fool cowboy needed rescuing from bounty hunters." "Bounty hunters who tried to burn us alive," Marguerite added indignantly. Davis's expression hardened. "That right? Well, operating outside the law won't stand in my jurisdiction." He turned to his deputies. "Johnson, take 2 men and follow their trail back. Find these bounty hunters and bring them in alive if possible, but don't take unnecessary risks." As 3 of the deputies rode off, Davis gestured toward town. "The rest of you come along. You look like you could use food and rest." The marshal's home in Cimarron became their sanctuary. His wife, a kind-faced woman named Sarah, immediately took charge of the sisters, providing them with hot baths, clean clothes, and a hearty meal. Zechariah, after giving Davis a full account of their ordeal, gratefully accepted similar hospitality. By evening, the deputies had returned with Jackson and 2 of his men in custody. The others had fled upon seeing the lawmen's approach. "They'll stand trial for attempted murder," Davis informed them as they gathered in his parlor after dinner. "Bounty hunting isn't illegal, but trying to burn folks alive certainly is." "What about our father?" Charlotte asked, the question they'd all been avoiding. "When he learns where we are?" Davis's expression grew serious. "That's a complication. Legally, as your father, Silverwood has certain rights." But he held up a hand as Madeline began to protest. "Given the circumstances, and the fact that you're all of age, I believe we can make a case that his actions constitute criminal behavior." "He locked us in a cellar without adequate food or water," Marguerite stated flatly. Then sent armed men to retrieve us dead or alive. If that's not criminal, what is? I agree, Davis assured her. But these things take time. Legal proceedings, testimony. He glanced at Zachariah. Meanwhile, I suggest you continue with your original plan. Get these ladies to St. Louis as quickly as possible. After the marshal and his wife retired for the evening, Zachariah and the sisters remained in the parlor, discussing their options. The train leaves Raton for the east tomorrow afternoon, Zachariah informed them. If we depart early morning, we can make it easily. And then, Charlotte asked, looking between her sisters and Zachariah, the question hung in the air, laden with implications. Madeline's gaze met Zachariah's across the room, the conversation they'd begun in the cabin still unfinished between them. I think, Marguerite said, rising deliberately, that Charlotte and I should get some rest. Tomorrow will be another long day. With pointed looks at their elder sister, the two younger Silverwoods bid them good night, leaving Madeline and Zachariah alone in the parlor's warm lamplight. For a moment, neither spoke, the silence between them comfortable yet charged with possibility. They really aren't subtle, my sisters, Madeline finally said, echoing her comment from days earlier. No, Zachariah agreed with a small smile. But they're right. We should talk about what happens after Raton. Madeline rose from her chair, moving to sit beside him on the small sofa. You never finished what you were going to say. In the cabin, before the fire. Zachariah took a deep breath, turning to face her directly. 5 years of running, of avoiding connections, of protecting himself from the pain of loss, all of it seemed to fall away as he looked into Madeline's green eyes. I was going to say that I've spent years convincing myself I didn't deserve happiness, that the price of my mistakes was a life alone. He reached out, gently taking her hand in his. But then I met you, and for the first time in 5 years I started thinking about tomorrow and the day after and the day after that. Madeline's fingers tightened around his. And what do you see in those tomorrows? You, he said simply. If you'll have me. The directness of his response brought a soft blush to her cheeks, but her gaze remained steady. I barely know you, she said, though her tone held no rejection. A week ago, I didn't even know you existed. And yet, she continued, I feel as though I've been waiting for you my entire life. The man who would break down the door of my prison and show me what freedom truly means. A smile touched her lips, both literally and figuratively, as it turns out. Zachariah raised her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her fingers. I won't pretend to be perfect, Madeline. I've made mistakes. I've carried guilt and grief for so long they've become part of me. I'm not asking for perfection, she replied softly, just honesty, partnership. The chance to discover who I am, who we might be together away from my father's shadow. I can promise you that, Zachariah said solemnly. And one thing more, for as long as you want me by your side, I'll be there. Not as your protector or savior, but as your equal, your partner in whatever life we build. Tears glistened in Madeline's eyes, but they were tears of joy, not sorrow. I think I'd like that very much, Zachariah Sullivan. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to withdraw, Zachariah leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle at first, almost tentative, but deepened as Madeline responded with unexpected passion. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless, years of loneliness and constraint dissolving in the warmth of newfound connection. Well, Madeline whispered, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth, I believe my sisters were right to leave us alone. Zachariah chuckled, keeping her hand in his as they sat together in companionable silence, contemplating the future that now seemed possible. The journey to Raton the next day was mercifully uneventful. Marshal Davis provided an escort to ensure they reached the railway station safely, though there was no sign of Jackson's remaining men or Thaddeus Silverwood himself. As they waited for the train that would carry them east, Zachariah purchased tickets for all four of them, a decision he'd made during the night, after his conversation with Madeline. Whatever uncertainty he still felt about settling in one place, he knew with absolute certainty that he wasn't ready to say goodbye to the Silverwood sisters, especially Madeline. The train arrived in a cloud of steam and clanging bells. As they prepared to board, Charlotte suddenly turned to Zachariah, impulsively embracing him. "Thank you," she said simply, "for everything." Marguerite followed suit, her usual reserve softening as she added, "We owe you our lives, Mr. Sullivan. I won't forget that." "Zachariah," he corrected gently. "I think we're well past formalities, don't you?" Marguerite smiled, nodding in agreement before following Charlotte onto the train. Madeline lingered on the platform, her hand in Zachariah's. "Last chance to change your mind," she said softly.
This story was
St.
posted on
Louis
the
is a
channel The
long
Rusty
way from the
Saddle.
open
Please do
country
not
you're used
repost
to.
it in any form.
Zachariah squeezed her hand reassuringly. "I'm exactly where I want to be." As the train pulled away from Raton, carrying them toward a new beginning in St. Louis, Madeline rested her head on Zachariah's shoulder, watching the New Mexico landscape roll past the window. Behind them lay danger and confinement. Ahead, uncertainty, but also possibility. It wasn't the future either of them had envisioned, but as Zachariah's arm tightened around her shoulders, Madeline knew it was the future they were meant to have together. Their arrival in St. Louis, 3 days later, marked the beginning of a new chapter. With the help of Madeline's mother's cousin, a formidable widow named Eleanor Baker, who welcomed them with open arms and immediate understanding, they established themselves in the bustling city. Zachariah, drawing on his ranger experience, found work with the city's police force, his knowledge of criminal behavior and tracking proving valuable in the urban environment. Madeline, true to her ambition, secured a position teaching at a progressive girls' school founded by Eleanor's late husband. Charlotte thrived in the city, her natural vivacity blossoming as she pursued studies in music and art. Marguerite, the most practical of the sisters, discovered an aptitude for business, eventually managing Eleanor's considerable investments with remarkable skill. 6 months after their arrival, they received word from Marshal Davis that Thaddeus Silverwood had been indicted for criminal neglect and false imprisonment based on their sworn statements. The news brought a complex mixture of emotions: relief, vindication, and a certain sadness for what might have been had grief not twisted a father's love into something dark and controlling. A year to the day after Zachariah had broken down the cellar door and led the sisters to freedom, he and Madeline were married in a simple ceremony in Eleanor Baker's garden. Charlotte played the piano while Marguerite stood as witness, both sisters radiant with happiness for the couple who had found love amid such desperate circumstances. As they exchanged vows beneath an arbor of climbing roses, Zachariah reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. 5 years of running had ended the day he'd heard faint voices calling for help from behind a locked cellar door. In saving the Silverwood sisters, he had ultimately saved himself finding purpose, forgiveness, and a love he'd never dared to imagine possible. Later that evening, as they danced beneath lantern light, Madeline whispered in his ear, "Do you ever miss the open country, the freedom of the trail?" Zachariah's arms tightened around her waist as he considered the question. "Sometimes," he admitted honestly. "But then I remember what true freedom is." "And what is that?" she asked, her green eyes reflecting the soft glow of the lanterns. "The freedom to love," he replied simply. to build something lasting, to wake up each morning knowing exactly where and with whom I belong. Madeline's smile was radiant as she rose on tiptoe to kiss him, the future stretching before them like an open road, one they would travel together, side by side, for all the days to come. 3 years later, their family grew with the birth of twin boys Thomas and James Sullivan, named for Zachariah's fallen partner and Madeline's beloved grandfather. A daughter, Elizabeth, followed 2 years after, completing their family and bringing joy that neither had dared to dream possible during those desperate days of flight across the New Mexico territory. On summer evenings, they would often sit on the porch of their comfortable home near Forest Park, watching their children play while Zachariah told them carefully edited stories of adventures in the West. Sometimes, Charlotte and Marguerite would join them, the bonds forged in adversity having grown into an unbreakable family connection that transcended blood. And sometimes, when the night was clear and the stars particularly bright, Zachariah and Madeline would share a private smile, remembering a conversation beneath a desert sky about stars that made one feel small in the best possible way. For in finding each other, they had discovered a universe of possibility neither had believed existed, a love born in fire that had only grown stronger with each passing day. In the end, it wasn't just three sisters who had been freed from that dark cellar in Placitas. A wandering cowboy with a burdened heart had found liberation too in the courage of three women who refused to be victims, and in the love of one who had seen past his scars to the man he truly was.